Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this webinar organized by the NESOI project on energy planning topics. We are waiting just a few more seconds and then we will start the webinar. Okay, we are now starting the webinar. Welcome again to this webinar of the NESOI project on energy planning. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I will briefly introduce you myself and the objectives of today's webinar. My name is Giorgio Bonvicini. I am an energy engineer and I work at RINA Consulting, partner of the NESOI project, the NESOI consortium. In this webinar, we will talk about the lessons learned during the NESOI project on energy planning project. As you know, in the NESOI project, we are supporting 54 islands energy transition projects that belong to different categories of project, energy planning, of course, feasibility studies, design, access to finance, business modeling, and many different categories of project. And in order to create knowledge also for external stakeholders not benefiting of the NESOI technical and financial assistance, we have built internally to our consortium focus groups on specific topics or types of projects. And we are organizing this series of webinars. This is the first of the set of webinars on capacity building, leveraging on the lessons learned from the provision of technical assistance to islands in their energy transition project. Today I will start with an overview of the potential methodologies for energy planning, specifically talking about sustainable energy and climate action plans, sustainable urban mobility action plans, and port level energy planning activities. Then we will learn more about 3 projects that we have supported in NESOI, one in Croatia, Island of Kirk, SECAP for all, with the presentation by Vedran Kirinic. Then one project in Greece, energy planning for clean energy transition for Astypalea, with the presentation from Petros Markopoulos. And then one project in Italy, development of consistent key strategy of the strait port system, with a presentation by Daniele Enea. After these 3 presentations, we will have a panel discussion and a final wrap-up. So now I start with the first presentation from my side regarding the methodology for energy planning. Okay. Thank you. Energy planning is the basis of decision making in the energy sector, as planning in general is the first step to decide where we are going and what we want to do for the energy transition of our island. As you know, in most management systems, we applied that damming cycle, as you can see schematized on the right, plan, do, check, act. Now we are focusing on the planning phase, which is the first phase for the subsequent implementation and then monitoring of the actions carried out. Of course, there are many opportunities to carry out energy transition projects also without an overall planning at island level. There are many things that make sense also if implemented individually, but if we want to realize an overall energy transition for the island, if we have ambitious targets like achieving full decarbonization, 100% renewable energy supply, and very important impact in terms of energy transition and decarbonization for the whole island, we need a careful energy planning, which enables the optimization of the investment to be carried out to reach energy, environmental, and socioeconomic targets at island level. Of course, since planning implies technical topics, financial topics, legal topics, it is a multidisciplinary activity that requires a multidisciplinary expertise. And this is the approach that we also are adopting in NESOI, where we have for each project a technical advisor, an economic financial advisor, a legal advisor, from the NESOI consortium, and local advisors that can be, of course, again, technical, economic, legal, which focus on the local features, specific local features. Next slide, please. Thank you. In the activities of the NESOI project, and specifically in the focus group on energy planning, we are, as I have mentioned before, collecting lessons learned from the different projects on energy planning that we are delivering in NESOI. We have divided planning activities also for the lessons learned collection in these four main phases. The first one is baseline analysis, the determination of an initial energy balance and emission inventory for the island. Then the selection of potential energy transition actions, the identification of potential funding options, and the evaluation of the compliance with the legal and regulatory context. And then to conclude, the redaction of action plans and the definition of monitoring procedures. So the idea here, in line with the approach that I have briefly introduced before, is to start from the analysis of the context, the selection of the actions to be implemented, the evaluation of the potential opportunities to concretely realize these actions, and then the definition of an action plan with a time plan for the realization of these actions and the actions needed for the monitoring. Next slide, please. In this presentation, I will show you 3 cases of energy planning that can be implemented at island level. The first is constituted by Clean Energy Transition Agenda and Sustainable Energy and Climate Action Plan. Then I will briefly talk you about Sustainable Urban Mobility Planning and about Port Level Energy Planning, which is a peculiar topic in Italy, but can also be extrapolated in other EU countries. Some of you can still remember SECAP, Sustainable Energy Action Plan, which is the previous version of SECAP, Sustainable Energy and Climate Action Plan, which now includes also climate change related risks and opportunities and mitigation and adaptation topics. We will also mention this in the following slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we start from Clean Energy Transition Agenda and SECAP. This is the table of content, the structure for CITA. We start from an introductory part, of course, the baseline assessment, the vision of the island, the energy system description, where we describe the main energy flows in input, the energy uses, so the energy balances, the emissions and environmental impact associated to the energy consumption that occurs on the island. Then, since a relevant part of island energy needs is related to transport, we focus also on transport in chapter 5. Then waste and water management that offer significant opportunities for energy related actions. And then after all of these analyses have been carried out, we focus on the definition of intervention for energy transition and their prioritization based on specific indicators. To conclude, in chapter 8, monitoring provisions are presented in order to allow, through indicators, monitoring of the implementation of the actions that have been planned. In the next slide, we see how Sustainable Energy and Climate Action Plan, SECAP, is in some way similar in terms of structure, since we start with an introduction, the city strategies that is connected with the vision that we have mentioned earlier, legislation and policy to see how the vision and the characteristic of the specific island are connected with national, EU, and worldwide targets. Then we start with the analysis of the baseline, so baseline emission inventory. Then we move to the proposed actions for energy transition and specifically for mitigation, climate change mitigation that is strongly connected with energy transition topics in terms of reduction of CO2 emissions. Then we move to adaptation topics, so how the island is reacting to climate change related risks and adapts to climate change. And then again, the last chapter is focused on monitoring and reporting. In the next slide, we have done a mix of these two methodologies to focus on the different phases of energy planning. So we start from the overall baseline assessment. This is done more on a qualitative and I would say not directly energy related perspective. So we assess the characteristic of the island, the geographical characteristic and general features, the location, the connections, the orography, etc., the economic activities. Is it a mainly tourism-based island? Is it agricultural-based? Does it present significant industries, etc.? We address the topic of energy poverty, also in relation to the high energy supply costs that typically are found on islands. When we analyze the local governance structure, the institutional stakeholders engaged in energy planning, the ambition and vision and targets of the island, and then we focus on the comparison with national and EU policies and regulation. Next slide, please. We have called this second phase detailed baseline assessment, since, as we have seen in the previous phase, we focus more on qualitative and non-directly energy-related topics, while here we go directly to the energy-related topics. We analyze the energy demand breakdown by sector, by type of energy vector, electricity, fuels, etc. We analyze the link between the use of energy and pollution and also greenhouse gas emissions. We evaluate emission factor, we evaluate the emission inventory for the main categories of greenhouse gas, of course CO2 and also pollutant. We analyze how much renewable energy we have in the island energy system. We define energy indicators with reference to the baseline that then will be used also to check how the implementation of the plan is proceeding with the implementation of concrete actions. We analyze, of course, as mentioned earlier, also the transport system with reference to aerial, to terrestrial, and to maritime transport, and we analyze waste and water management. In SECAP compared to CETA, we are also evaluating climate-related risks in this phase. So we are checking the baseline climate conditions, the expected changes that we see in the upcoming decades based on the projections available, and then we, in the following phase, we evaluate opportunities for their mitigation and adaptation. In the next slide, we see the intervention, definition, and prioritization. So we start from the definition of the issue, what we want to address with our proposal for improvement, so description of the current situation. We provide a technical description of the measure that we propose to implement, and we estimate the benefits in terms of energy transition, of reduction of demand, of reduction of emissions, etc. We estimate the investment needed for the implementation of the action. We prepare an action plan with the list of the measures and the proposed priority and time for implementation, and then we define monitoring procedures. As I've mentioned before, in the SECAP, due to the C component, the climate component, we also include actions for the adaptation to climate change. Then, in the next slide, okay, thank you. This is just for your reference, 3 documents that can be useful for more information regarding the methodology for CETA. There are 2 documents by the Clean Energy for EU Islands initiative, and for SECAP, in addition to the official guidelines for the reduction of CEAP and SECAP by the GRC of the European Commission, we also have this guide by the Compete for SECAP project. So we have completed this part on CETA and SECAP, and now we move to SUMP, Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan, in the next slide. Here we start from some initial notes on SUMP, which are, of course, one of the main tools available to tackle transport and mobility in urban and suburban areas, and islands typically also fall under this wider category. They have more or less a 10-year history, being promoted by the European Commission since 2011-2013. They follow more or less the same cyclical approach as all energy planning projects, and so they are articulated in different phases and steps in order to complete the final evaluation. And here you have also the link to the documents that you can check for additional details on the methodology. In the next slide, we go into a bit more of detail regarding SUMP. So we have a list of questions that have been elaborated by the SUMP guidelines to guide the public authority in carrying out the evaluation of sustainable urban mobility. As you can see, all the half on the right of this circle is focused on the planning. So the setup of the resources dedicated to the analysis, the main problems and opportunities related to mobility, the potential options for the future, the vision. Here the question is, what kind of city do we want? This is related to the vision that the island has, how we will determine success, set targets and indicators. So we are completing the analysis of the baseline by defining indicators that are useful to evaluate the baseline situation and how things are going to change with the implementation of the improvement actions. Then the blue part, this quarter on the bottom left, is related to the do. If we, in the previous one, we were in the plan phase, here we are on the do phase. So what concretely will we do? What will it take and who will do what? Are we ready to go? These are the 3 questions set out in this chart that are related to the definition of the potential list of actions for the increase of the sustainability of the urban mobility, to the evaluation of the benefits related to the implementation of these actions, to the indicators that measure the success of their implementation. And then we move to the top left part of the chart, the red part, where we are in the check and act phase, if we refer to the PDCA cycle that I have shown at the beginning. So how we can manage well, how are we doing, what have we learned? We are here evaluating how the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan implementation is proceeding through indicators. We are determining lessons learned, and we are acting to make potential changes that are needed following this evaluation. We have 2 additional slides on the SUMP. In the next one, we have a list of the activities that are carried out in these 4 main phases of the SUMP. So in the initial assessment, of course, we are defining the methodology, identifying stakeholders, reviewing the available data, and carry out an initial assessment. In the second part, we carry out a mobility diagnosis. So we launch design, of course, and launch and collect the data from a mobility survey. We execute the field work, including participatory activities. We construct a GIS-based system to map the mobility situation of the island. And then we carry out an energy balance and environmental evaluation and write down a report of the mobility diagnosis. In the next slide, we see also the last 2 phases. Here in the phase 3, we are developing the real SUMP. So we are defining and quantifying mobility related KPIs. We are defining and simulating a transport scenarios. So what will change if we are implementing the action we propose? We design, of course, the concrete measures for energy transition in the transport sector, carry out an assessment, a prioritization of the most cost-effective options. We design the monitoring system, and we quantify the budget required for the implementation of each action. In phase 4, we prepare for the implementation of the SUMP, and of course, we focus on the provision of recommendation to the authorities that are involved in the management of mobility, in terms of responsibility, monitoring, and financial planning, etc. So again, linked with the previous presentation on SITA and SECAP, we see that the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan starts from the analysis of the baseline context, from a quantitative analysis or diagnosis of the mobility on the island, the proposal of the potential actions for improvement with an estimation of the investment needed, the benefits, energy, mobility related and environmental that can be achieved, and the action planning phase where we are preparing the list of the action with the timing, the priority, and the opportunities for monitoring and for further improvement following the implementation. We move now to a topic that is related to both island energy planning and mobility. We are moving to ports. Here, as I have mentioned before, my presentation is mainly based on guidelines applicable at Italian level, but that can be extrapolated also in other contexts. Since 2016, indeed, in Italy, it is mandatory for all the port authorities, both on islands and also on the mainland, but we mainly focus on those on the islands, of course, to carry out an energy and environmental planning document of the overall port system. You can find the guidelines for this activity, for this kind of document at this link that is in Italian. But I will present you the main contents of this kind of document, thank you, in this slide. Port energy planning is articulated into 4 main phases that are reflected in 4 main chapters in the ASP document. Chapter 1 is the baseline analysis, focused on socioeconomic, on regulatory, on the infrastructure and traffic data. Then chapter 2 is related to the expected development, so the main infrastructural investments, the links with the strategic planning that is being done at port level that will shape the port of the future, not only in energy terms, but also under the infrastructural point of view. Then we move to the real quantitative analysis of the baseline that is called carbon footprint, since it mainly focused on CO2 emissions, but of course it is related also to energy consumption and energy balances, considering both the onshore facilities of the port and ships in maneuvering and during the stay at berth. And then chapter 4 is the strategy itself, so the definition of the actions for the energy transition of the port with the technical details, the energy and environmental benefit, the cost-benefit analysis, and the action plan for their implementation. Next slide, please. Okay, so as I have mentioned, we start the activities from the baseline analysis that is focused on the available infrastructure and the analysis of traffic data. And on the expected development, so a strategic project that can impact directly or indirectly on energy aspects. For example, the main ones that are being planned on Italian ports that can strongly impact on energy aspects are cold ironing, so the potential connection to the mainland electricity grid of ships at berth, and LNG storage and distribution as alternative fuel to marine diesel oil. In the next slide, we see some more details on carbon footprint. Carbon footprint needs to be focused on different type of assets, so those directly managed by the Port Authority, those managed by all port operators, that can be hundreds of companies for large ports, those by ships at berth and during maneuvering, and also by vehicles used in port areas, so trucks, cars embarking and disembarking the vessels, all the machinery used to move goods in port areas, etc., etc. So as you can understand, there is a lot to do regarding the engagement of stakeholders for data collection. There is a strong need for assumptions related to fuel consumption of ships and vehicles, since these data are limitedly monitored. And then the final target is to realize charts and tables with the breakdown of energy consumption and greenhouse gas emission by fuel, location, type of energy user, which is needed for the following planning phases. In the next slide, we see some references to the strategy and action plan, which of course strongly depends on the vision of the Port Authority. It is based on the energy transition action identified and ranked according to the best benefit cost ratio. And to this aim, a standard catalog of potential energy transition actions is provided by the guidelines prepared by the ministry. I have mentioned cost-benefit ratio. Indeed, the execution of a cost-benefit analysis in line with the EU guidelines, so considering not only the energy-related revenues and costs, but also the internalization of external costs and benefits, for example, the variation of pollutant and greenhouse gas emission, but not only this, is required for port-level energy planning, as well as the identification of funding opportunities that is important for the planning of the real implementation of the actions identified. We have one last slide now with some lessons learned during the focus group activities that I have mentioned regarding energy planning at a wider level, so SECAP, SECAP, SUMP, port level, whatever kind of energy planning. Of course, the main point that we want to highlight are related to the need to engage stakeholders, which is required both for data collection and analysis and also for the decision-making process. Then the need to leverage on international guidelines and methodologies to ensure the quality and the uniformity of studies done across different islands. The key role played by technology catalogs that should not be limited only to the high TRL technologies, but also to the more innovative ones that could be applied for the energy transition of the island, and also the tools to match the energy demand and the sustainable energy supply at island level. Then the importance of translating high-level strategic goals for the island into short-term actions and investment, a real action plan made by simple actions to be carried out in order to reach the final target of decarbonization of energy transition. Of course, the importance of the knowledge of the local context in terms of regulatory and legal aspect, and mainly to permitting aspect, which strongly impacts on the timeline for the implementation of this project. And to conclude, the need of funding, consider funding related topics, both for the realization of energy planning, which of course has a cost since it involves a multidisciplinary team, and of course the need to consider funding related aspects in order to prepare the action plans that should be feasible also under the funds availability point of view. This was my last slide. Now, as I have anticipated, we will focus on the experience developed in NESOI, in 3 NESOI projects on energy planning. We will have a first 15 minutes presentation on the project, and then for each 5-minute presentation on the potential replication of this kind of projects. So we have the first presentation on Kirk experience. Please, Vedran, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good morning. And thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to present our experience while developing the SECAP for the island of Kirk. You probably know the island of Kirk is well known in terms of energy transition in Croatia. We have been working on it for a decade now, and much has been done in the previous time related to renewables, sustainable transport, energy efficiency, water resources management, and waste collection. Also, there are ambitious plans to establish in a cooperation with the academic sector to go into direction of developing a research center where there will be a showcase of various technologies related to energy transitions, not only to end users, to citizens, but also to be monitored, to be somehow related to business development, and by possibly creating new business opportunities for SMEs and for startups. So although the island had much experience in all these areas, it did not have a joint strategy related to climate change. Only one municipality had SAP, as you already mentioned. This is the previous version of SECAP, and this was the town of Kirk. And on the island of Kirk, there are 7 municipalities with different approaches, different strategies, but also they are joined in this energy transition project, and they have many projects done together as they see climate change and related topics as something important that is that goes above the only one municipalities. So therefore it was crucial to gather them around this idea, and they were ambitious to pursue the goal of becoming climate neutral. They have from the 2012 they have one joint strategy of becoming climate neutral, but this was not done with a procedure of SECAP. It was only list of technologies, it was energy calculations and so on, but without this climate part. So there was extensive, and there is extensive experience which would be used in following phases of implementation and also monitoring of this project. Okay, next please. As you can see, the island of Kirk is within 500 kilometers of several European capitals, and therefore it is an auto destination where, although there is a local airport, people mainly come by cars, by private vehicles, and here we have a huge pressure on the many systems, and especially transport system on the island during summer season, which is, I believe, similar to many islands in Europe. And therefore this is a good opportunity. It was a good opportunity to develop some ideas, some solutions which could be used and replicated in other islands. And I especially am looking forward to hear the next presentation from Greece to learn about what Astypalea is doing in this sense. So next, please. As mentioned, the great seasonality, and on the island, which is the biggest Croatian island together with the island of Stress, there is around 5% of Croatian tourism, with many people actually having their weekend houses on the island. So not necessarily foreign tourists, but also some locals who live in neighboring cities, in the city of Rijeka, in the Republic of Slovenia, and so on, where people have their own houses coming during a weekend, and therefore there is even potential to extend this season to go a bit further, not only to focus on some solutions only for summer season, but also for the whole year. This is the idea actually of starting some pilot projects such as sharing system for electric bikes, let's say. Okay, next please. As I already said, a lot of studies preparations have been done in this sense, and this was a good input for us while developing SECAP. And this is actually quite important to be aware of even not only the technical aspect, but the mindset of people while approaching these quite complex and multidisciplinary projects. As you can see, many calculations, many analyses have been done. Some projects of even installing wind farms on the island, and then related to mobility. I already mentioned research center and so on. So in this sense, the island has been preparing for a decade to go into the energy transition, which is now at the present moment very interesting. And but even having all this analysis and calculations, they still haven't tackled the joint SECAP area. Okay, next please. You can see the example of their strategy related to renewables, to installing some renewables, to implement energy saving measures, to develop e-mobility, and there are some network connection issues. It says I got a notification. Is everything fine? You can hear me well? Okay. So in this sense, they have strategy, but this has to be revised and continuously monitored, and even more should be done in somehow presenting these topics to end users, not only to have it on paper as some strategies, but to have some dissemination projects and some conferences and so on, in this sense, to be able for end users, for citizens, for businesses to participate in energy transition. Next, please. Next slide, please. Okay, here are some examples of the projects, and this was all done in last year, several years, and we use this information while developing SECAP. As I said, so this was here. I'd like to emphasize you gave a great introduction in parts of SECAP, and methodology is well known, but from my side, the great challenge is how to use the existing data, how actually to collect the missing data. And this is something that I'd like to share our experience, because already you can see that lots of things have been done in the island of Kirk, but we still had issues while trying to collect some data. Next, please. And here, for example, the NESOI project started in July. So this was in the middle of summer season. So we actually were prepared for this. We knew that we wouldn't be able to collect some data from local institutions, because they simply did not have enough resources go into their analysis, into their resources, and therefore we have to somehow postpone some parts of calculations and to go further in order not to be delaying all the process. You see that we already have been using a lot of existing calculations, but still, for instance, they didn't have energy consumption data for all public buildings. They have 7 municipalities. They have already established its national-wide monitoring system, but some of the buildings didn't have consumption entered. Some of people didn't know the exact methodology, how to enter this data, and so on. So during this process of collecting data, we help them to somehow automate this procedure in order to not only to be easier for this project, but for some future analysis, in order to enable some future monitoring phases, how to be even for them easier to collect the data, to monitor data, and to have some feedback from their actions that would be recommended in SECAP. Okay, next please. Next please. Okay, so here we did a standard procedure. Let's say with SECAP, we did energy analysis, we did calculate emissions, we proposed some measures related to adaptation to mitigation, and here we had a great cooperation with local action group, which is actually the beneficiary of NESOI, and it's important here to emphasize that they gather several stakeholders from different sectors, and they're able to communicate with all these entities, and not only during the development of the project, but now I see the most challenging part, if we want to be successful, really successful in this project, would be the implementation phase and the monitoring phase, because we did 1 year of developing SECAP. Now they have to adopt it on their councils, the municipalities. But now the question is whether this is really going to be successful project that's going to be implemented, or we just going to have some future iterations of this document with some let's say little movements forward. So therefore it's really important to have a good local partner who understand the process, who are willing to cooperate, who are willing to motivate all these different various stakeholders. For instance, we had in one municipality, we had some questions. Why do we have to do this? Why do we have to collect data? We already submitted data for different analysis. Now we have to do it again and again. So although there was support from a mayor, the staff was not aware of the importance of the project, and they did show some resistance. So it's really not only to be able to technically develop all these parts of the document, but really to be able to successfully manage all these different issues during the project. This is for me something that's really important to mention. Okay, next please. Here we see that together with local action group, we had the cooperation with public utility company, which is actually a company that creates and somehow manages many policies on the island. And it's really important to mention that actually their initiative is quite important in all these projects related to energy transition on the island. We have similar companies on Croatian islands, other Croatian islands, and therefore really important to establish a good cooperation with such companies, with tourist boards, and all the other entities who are maybe not directly involved into development of the document, but in later phases I see them as crucial partners while trying to implement all these actions, and also through projects that follow. We know that in NESOI we had calculation of which amount of the investment is planned, is somehow envisioned, and here we depend on them whether they are willing to move forward to apply and submit different project proposals in future in order to implement all these actions and measures that were described in SECAP. Okay, next please. Yes, so here it's quite important also to mention the local context, because without the support of people, of end users, they would feel that this is something that they are forced to, not that they are part of it. Therefore, we wanted to include them as much as possible, and even in these later phases, through different workshops and events, as I already shown, this conference with electric vehicles, somehow to include them, to feel that this is their energy transition, they are part of it, not only to be something written in some planning document and now nothing related to them. Okay, next please. Yes, the lessons learned in this project. Next, please. So apart from including all the, let's say, official stakeholders from local authorities, municipalities, and some tourist offices and so on, the goal from my side should be to find a way to include citizens, to include businesses, because they are going to be the future actors of this transition, and therefore really support of local community is crucial in not maybe in developing the document, but in later phases, because we have seen on many SAPs developed before that they are revised after several years and nothing much has been done, because people just don't feel it like something that it's important for them. This is something given from some planning authority or some municipality, but not like being their own energy transition. Here I have to mention that while developing such document, we definitely used all the data and analysis calculations already been done, but also the ability to have a multidisciplinary team of experienced experts is quite important, and also to have support from either NESOI, or we had a great cooperation with local Voltai's office, and together in communication with them, this is for us, it was crucial to be on time, to be able to somehow push local authorities to provide all the data, and also to give us feedback and some control in order to be in time with developing projects. So this having the monitoring and communication with some external entity it was quite important in this project, and I wish to thank both NESOI and Voltais in this support. Okay, this is it from my side. Now you're gonna go through this part, right?
Okay, thank you, Vedran. Well, I am Domenico Perfido from F2M Solution, and we are in charge in the project, NESOI project, about exploitation and replicability action, basically. I will share now with you some tips for replication of the SECAP project, also in other islands. Well, in doing though, we have developed a methodology to define the level of replicability of a project. This methodology is based on indicators that take in account different aspects from geographical aspects, technological aspects, legal, social, or fundings and resource availability. These indicators are evaluated in the methodology that we have applied in the project from 0 to 3, and the general objective at the end is to give an idea of the replicability level of an intervention by taking in consideration the project that we have developed in NESOI. As we have seen, the SECAP for Kirk Island is a successful history, and I can say that by applying this methodology that I have just announced, we can say that from geographical point of view, the island don't need specific climate or morphology to replicate this project. Is a SECAP, so it's a development of decarbonization intervention plans for an island. It can be easily replicated. From the technological point of view, the technology that are used in the specific case of Kirk Island is proven, so we have scored also this indicator at high level. From legal point of view, the project don't have any legal limitation. Of course, it is should be adapted to the legal framework, but I think this is something feasible. About social acceptance, the project is something that give beneficial for the whole community, and so from the social acceptance point of view also has been assessed at high level. While for the topics that it develop, of course, fundings, it results highly investable as a project in general. Please, next slide. Yes, thank you. You have seen that the project, the Kirk SECAP, has been assessed with an high replicability and exploitation potential, and this is also due to the fact that the technology that is based on our proven technology. We have seen that there are electrical vehicles that are provided by proven company and so on. In general, we can say that SECAP is an interdisciplinary document that, of course, needs social involvement and involvement of all kinds of stakeholders in order to develop it. And of course, it needs also some expertise, expert support in order to analyze the different and big number of data that are under the development of a SECAP about different topics, and the situation is also more difficult when we talk about islands, because islands, of course, are characterized by great seasonality changes in data and so on. And well, that's all for now, and I give the floor to the other project.
Thank you, Domenico. Now it's the turn of Petros presenting Astypalea project for 15 minutes. Please, Petros, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Giorgio. Thanks a lot for the invitation. It's really nice to be here among all these interesting projects. A few words right before getting into the NESOI. Astypalea is a medium-sized island, let's say, of almost 100 square kilometers, a population of a bit more than 1,000 people, an average yearly number of tourists close to 40,000. The main economic activities apart from tourism are also agriculture and fishing. It's really far from the mainland, 9 hours by boat, but it happens to have an airport, which really is important for the interconnection of an island. Its energy infrastructure consists right now of a thermal station and some solar PVs, around 300 kilowatts. So the main electrification source is diesel oil. Next slide, please. So Astypalea has been chosen as a pilot island for a big project that is implemented by the Volkswagen Group together with several ministries of the Greek government, the region of Aegean Islands, the municipality of Astypalea, the Greek TSO, HEDNO, and DAFNI, where also I happen to belong, DAFNI Network of Sustainable Greek Islands, acting as an external counselor to the technical advisor to the municipality. This project, next slide. This project consists of 4 pillars. The first one is a swift electrification of the fleet of the island, both in terms of utility vehicles and private ones. So there has been a heavy incentivization of the purchase of EVs specifically designed for the island in order to switch to e-mobility. The second pillar is on-demand mobility. There are some services developed on the island specifically for it that include on-demand mobility, meaning that you can order via an application a bus to pick you up and take you somewhere. We'll see more details about that afterwards. There is a EV sharing system too, and there is also other services developed. Finally, there is a charging and energy pillar, which includes the development of a hybrid energy system that will replace the diesel generators to feed the charging infrastructure. It is going to be deployed in 2 stages. The first one, that will include only solar PVs, will cover 60% of the annual electricity demand, including the extra demand caused by the electrification of the transportation. And the second stage that is expected around 2016, 2026, will aim to decarbonize fully the electrical system of the island, achieving RES penetration over 90%. Finally, there is a future option including testing autonomous driving on the island after the whole ecosystem has been fully electrified and digitalized, but that's something that it's still a future plan. So next slide. So this is where the need for the municipality was born to implement its own planning in order to direct this project in a direction where the local municipality is participating and including in the whole project implementation in order to also maximize the local benefit. Next slide. And in fact, it includes the development of 2 documents. The one is a SETA, so energy planning, and the second one is a SUMP for mobility planning. So Giorgio presented very well what a SUMP is and what the steps are. I won't repeat them, but I would like to emphasize on the fact that we're talking about a sustainable island mobility plan. What we wanted to stress by this term is that there are certain differences between an island and a city that create the need to adapt the general directions of how to create a SUMP to the specificities of the island, the specific needs of the island. So, for example, we have very low population density, we have lack of trail infrastructure, lack of cycling infrastructure, There is a huge role for the maritime transport that should be included and taken account of during the design. There are very important external connections that during summer period, as also Vedran mentioned this for their island, they play a very important role and change totally the dynamics of the traffic and the movement around the island. There is many times the lack of pedestrian infrastructure, high population fluctuation, which creates different needs during winter and summertime. The local road transport is many times limited, and the land cover, of course, varies importantly among settlements and rural areas that are also included, in contrast to the urban landscape where we're talking about in normal SUMP. So these are characteristics that we need to take into account and integrate while designing the mobility of an island. So next slide, please. So at this stage, what has been done, of course, the SETA structure, also Giorgio described it, first includes the description of the island dynamics and containing geography, economy, population, stakeholders mapping, and of course policy and regulation analysis before going into the island transition path. And next slide, please. There is also a description of the current situation also in the mobility planning about the road network, parking spots, traffic parameters, public transportation system, pedestrian roads, bicycle paths, accidents, and so on. So at this stage, this is where the development is. There has been a very significant effort put to describe the current situation, and in the same time, what's really important in this case is that we're using this project in order to influence the actions that are really taken right now as we speak through the Smart and Sustainable Island project. So we have a planning project that runs in parallel with an implementation project, and this is really interesting in this case. So please, if we can go to the next slide. Okay, regarding the current situation, next slide. We have identified some mobility characteristics, which are the important seasonal variation multiplied by a factor of more than 4 during season, high dependency on privately owned means of transport, especially the use of motorcycles, insufficient transport service. There's a really low availability in transport, meaning that even low season demand is not served by taxis or bus. There is an informal tendency to shared mobility, very frequent that neighbors arrange some kind of carpooling for the purpose of shopping or other needs. There's the mobility needs mainly concern afternoon education or sports activities, leisure or other activities of everyday life that mainly include the children. The port and airport gates are underserved at the moment. Visitors have to wait long hours for taxis to return from one fair and pick them up again for a second or third round. And in high seasons, we have severe traffic and parking problems around Hora and Livadi during the main settlements during evening and night hours. Next slide. So in order to collect all this data, we had questionnaires with local citizens, interviews with stakeholders, and data requests from several authorities. It's very interesting that the interest that the locals are showing and the way we have to be innovative in order to gain their attention and get the data that we need. I think it's really important to focus on new tools of engaging the local stakeholders and the local communities during the implementation and design of such plans. Next slide. So here is an example of the analysis that was made for the mobility needs, the results for permanent seasonal population, the travel purpose, the travel mode, the traveling distance, travel time zones, and so on. We got into detail on what were the reasons of moving, what was the radius during summer and during winter, and so on. Next slide. So then there's a lot of mapping work that needs to be done. We have areas that are inaccessible to vehicles. And so after all this electrification of the fleet, it is important to have interventions planned for the areas where the cars cannot go. So we have a smart and sustainable island project taking care of the electrification and all these more new services regarding mobility, but we have also to make interventions in the areas where the vehicles cannot go. So in order to increase accessibility for the local citizens and make it easier for them to move in those areas. Next slide, please. We had a detailed mapping of touristic residences in order to know exactly where we should expect increased mobility, traffic, and parking. Next slide. And of course, a depiction of the concentration of commercial and recreational activities, again, to anticipate the workload for traffic and mobility. Next slide. So I'm showing all this in order to understand the depth that we have to go in order to gather enough data, in order to design all the activities that are running in parallel. And this is, first of all, the public EV charging infrastructure that was created. Next. I have to run because I'm really running out of time. So there's an electric vehicle charging plan that we want to integrate. This is mandatory for Greek authorities to develop, where in fact choosing the right places to install EV chargers, public EV chargers, and this is something that we want to integrate as part of the SUMP. Next slide, please. So for the planning procedure, there was an estimation of demand regarding the high season period, 3 user categories, estimation of the number of EVs and the penetration of EVs in the whole car market, travel distance per user category, and of course the technical characteristic of the EVs that lead us to the next slide. To the implementation of the charging station in certain positions. Next slide. And please press next because there are some numbers coming up here. So we have finally 20 publicly accessible charge points, 10 chargers comprised with 2 11 kilowatt sockets and 1 50 kilowatt DC fast charger for the electrical center of the medical center of the island. Next slide, please. Yes, and so it happens to be the largest EV charging network. These are the results of charging during summer. We see there is an overall use of 0.4, which is like really central in the island, the Peragialos position, and also in Chora, the main settlement of the island, is a bit lower. We have 0 use of electrical charging in the port, which is the Agios Andreas position. It is also important to notice that it was decided to have to adopt a differentiated costing procedure, choosing different tariffs for its charging station depending on its location, in order to promote locations that are not so often used. Next slide. So mobility on demand is the second service. And next. It was the service design, including the selection of virtual stops. There was extended consultation with the users, with the future users, in order to decide where the virtual stops for these buses would be. Next slide, please. And next, please, because there are some things here written. Yeah, so we had 5 zones, 27 virtual stops, total driving around 150,000 kilometers driven during summer, and around 22,000 total trips. most of them from the locals. This is really important, and only 30% from, and only 45% from the tourists, most of them Greek tourists. Next slide, please. Okay, also there was a hub for the accommodation of the EVs doing these trips that was created and included a 20 kilowatt solar panel for the needs of the EV charging. Next slide. So lessons learned, so that I try to be on time. The key challenges, there are a lot of technical challenges. There is a limited grid capacity, which you have to take into account when designing an e-mobility infrastructure, and there is a very close cooperation with the DSO that is necessary. We have to design with all infrastructure, taking into account whether it is e-mobility or bicycles and anything. We have to design in a way taking into account the resilience to the extreme conditions of the islands. The cabling and grounding networks, they're always a challenge because we have traditional settlements that really it's not easy to intervene there and not easy to do whatever you like in terms of aesthetic intervention. There is a need to designate the EV charging spot, but not only them. I mean, also for bike infrastructure, it is also very important to designate its use before users get accustomed to it, get used to it, and understand that it's there for a specific purpose, not to park their car and so on. And of course, there are a lot of legality and ownership issues of municipal buildings and parking lots that make it difficult to make interventions in them. Finally, we have some social challenges. Next slide, please. Also, regarding the local personnel, it's important the training, and that's why it's good to have all these NESOI webinars and the study tours that are planned in the next months, because the local personnel needs to be trained and know about all these new technologies. Then a very important aspect is that local businesses are heavily affected, creating the need for a just transition approach. It's also what Vedran said, that we need to have the stakeholders together in all steps of the design procedure. Seasonality creates the need for cooperation between the municipality and the tourism sector. It's not easy for a municipality to have all infrastructure to cover the huge increase in demand during summer. Traditional architecture creates challenges for the aesthetic adaptation of the infrastructure, and of course, it's also an opportunity, all these actions, for a unique island branding, also increasing tourism and making the island more attractive to tourists. And yes, finally, for optimal design, we need to consider local mobility patterns, points of interest, permanent and seasonal population distribution. So I think that's all from my side. Next slide, please. Okay, no reason to, okay, this is about the subsidization. And next slide, this is about the hybrid energy system. We talked about that. I think we're done. Next slide, please.
Okay.
Yes. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Petros. So I will keep short. Here you can see that we have applied the same methodology also for this specific project. Basically, the project has been assessed with an high replicability and exploitation potential, but it is a little bit lower than the first one that we have assessed, 2.8, just because, as you can see, the cost of investment in this case could be higher. Please, next slide. Yes, okay, thank you. We have seen that the project concerns the development of SETA and SUMP plants, but in this specific case, it is they are slightly modified for island application due to the seasonal variation of data that we have seen. Basically, these are both energy and planning documents that can be applied to different islands without problem. We have not foreseen legal barriers in developing this document, but of course we have to take in account the local legislative framework, because, for example, you have seen that municipalities are obliged to develop e-mobility charging plan and so on. So this is always a crucial aspect to assess. We have seen that also social acceptance of this project is high, and also the involvement of stakeholders and users in developing this kind of document is something crucial, essential for the success of the development of this energy plan. Well, we have seen that in the specific case, maybe the investment cost could be higher, and this is one of the motivation that have that because of the assess of the project about the depreciation indicator is a little bit lower. And well, that's all. And I leave the floor to the next project. Okay.
Thank you, Domenico. Now we have the third presentation on a project given by Daniele Enea from Enea on the development of the port energy planning for the Strait of Messina. Please, Daniele, the floor is yours for 15 minutes. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Giorgio, and thank you to all the NESOI team for the invitation to this webinar. So next slide, please. As Giorgio said in his first part of the presentation, the DOCS project is focused on a smaller system instead of the one we've seen in Greece and Croatia, just because the system that we analyzed is the system governed by the Strait Port System Authority, ADSP, that has the management of 3 ports in Sicily and 3 ports in Calabria that are in the south of Italy. So the Strait Port System Authority had the necessity to produce the energy and the environmental plan that is called DESP. And this document was mandatory by Italian government, and in particularly an Italian law give the guidelines to draft this DESP. And these guidelines point the attention on the energy sustainability and environmental criteria that have to be in line with the European policies, and also add a priority objective, that is the reduction of CO2 emissions. Please, next slide. Okay, these are the actors of the DOCS project. The beneficiary is the Autorità di Sistema Portuale dello Stretto, as I said, and the consortium, the NESOI consortium participants were Sinloc and RINA Consulting, while the external partners that were involved by the Strait Port System Authority were the Università Mediterranea of Reggio Calabria, that was in charge of the coordination of the project, and Enea, that is represented by me, and the CNR Italia of Messina, that is represented by Vincenzo Antonucci, that is still present at this webinar. Please, next. Okay, so here you can see the 3 ports in Sicily. They are located across the Strait of Messina. These are the port of Messina, Tremestieri, and Milazzo. The next, please. While these are the ports in Calabria, Reggio Calabria, Villa San Giovanni, and Saline Ionica, that is the smaller one, and of the 6 ports that is managed by the Strait Port System Authority. And next, please. Okay, the data collection was carried out, and here you can see some baseline data regarding with the port goods that are moved across these ports. Here you can see the liquid bulk, such as crude oil and petroleum products that are mainly that involves mainly the port of Milazzo, solid bulk, and packaged goods. But we also have a very important ship traffic, particularly regular passengers, mainly concentrated in the ports of Messina and Reggio Calabria. There are people that lives in the two parts of the strait, and every day has to move just to go working or go to school. In the chart below, the cruise passengers that are mainly they are only concentrated in the port of Messina. That is the one that had as the infrastructures able to control to have these cruise passengers. Here you can see that the 2020 was saw the big decrease in terms of cruise passengers mainly, and also in regular passengers due to the lockdown that we remember. So next, please. So the contents of the DESP, this environmental and energy plan, is based on this part. The first one is the estimation of energy consumption. The second one is the estimation of CO2 emissions with the carbon footprint method. Then the identification of criticalities and energy environmental objectives. Then the identification of interventions and measures for energy efficiency and renewable energy. Then feasibility assessment by means of cost-benefit analysis. And finally, the programming of intervention. Next, please. So here you can see the data collection about the energy consumption. Here you can see I put this consumption in a logarithmic scale as to also visually point the difference in terms of energy consumption, just because from the lower one, that is the port of Reggio Calabria, with 2000 megawatt-hour per year of energy consumption. Then there is a consumption by an order of magnitude higher, that is Villa San Giovanni. Then another order of magnitude higher, that is Messina and Tremestieri, with 125,000 megawatt-hour per year of consumption. And then the last one, the port of Milazzo, that has two orders of magnitude higher. In fact, the consumption is 17 millions of megawatt-hour per year, and this is due to the presence as concessionaries of two energy intensives bodies. There are the refinery of Milazzo and the electric power plant also in Milazzo. The next one, please. So in this slide, you can see the difference, the total consumption in percentage. And here you can see that if you do not consider the presence of the two energy intensive the port of Messina and Tremestieri as the 75% as a mean of energy consumption, while the other ones, the other one follows Villa San Giovanni and then Milazzo and Reggio Calabria. But if you consider the chart on the right below, you can see how considering the energy intensive, so the refinery and the power plant, here you can see that things are really changed, and also almost 95% of energy consumption is concentrated in the port of Milazzo. Here you can see in the chart the decrease in consumption in 2020 compared to 2019. You can consider a 20% decrease for all the ports. So next, please. In this slide, you can see the GHG emissions that were calculating in base of the UNI and ISO 14064. That is the methodology that is was tested on the ports by the EU Clean Port project, that is included in the ministerial guidelines that we used to draft the DEAS. And so here you can see that the differences that we showed for the energy consumption are reflected for the calculation of GHG emissions. So next, please. So the next part of the DEASP was the identification of the vision. The vision is based on two pillars: the improve of energy efficiency that is carried out by the reduction of emissions by boats and vehicles, and the reduction of energy consumption of buildings and port infrastructures. While the second pillar of the vision of the DEASP is the promotion of the use of renewable energy, particularly the production of energy from renewable sources that were identified in the photovoltaic plants and also tidal systems. So next, please. In this slide, you can see how the vision was scheduled in three main dates: 2030, 2040, and 2050. So with several steps, we consider in 2030 the possibility to create renewable energy communities, one for each port, as to share the production of energy by renewable energy sources with among the concessionary of the port. Then a strong penetration of renewable source plants just to increase the covering of green energy production. The port grids the energy mix based on LNG, just because ADSP is really interested in the promotion of this fuel that has environmental benefits. And there are also some concessionaries that pointed on the switch of their cruise ships to LNG and also to hydrogen. So also in 2030, the first application of hydrogen tidal-based systems, and the cold ironing that also Giorgio said. So the electrification of the infrastructures has to avoid the CO2 emissions and particulate matter emissions inside the ports, just to have an electrical connection with the grid of the port. In 2040, a strong impact of port robotization and also partial replacement of LNG with hydrogen. While in 2050, the main objective of the ADSP is the fully decarbonization of the port system. So next, please. Here you can see how the strategical objectives were in line and coherent with the energy and GHG emissions reductions policy of the European Union. Particularly, we focused on the at moment the objective, the Italian objective is 33% by 2030 compared to the 2005 scenario. That is a target of the PNIEC, the Italian Integrated Energy and Climate Plan, and in the target of the ADSP included in the DASP is 35%, so a more a higher target respect the Italian one. Next, please. So this is a graphic representation of the renewable energy community. So the port has to become a grid in which energy has to be shared, produced by PV plants and able to charge electric vehicles, able to be stored as to cover the necessities of the concessionaries. And also this energy should be produced by tidal plants. In fact, there are many studies regarding with the possible realization of tidal plants in the Strait of Messina, that are considered really important for the development of this technology in the future. And also an Italian law just recently recognized the status of renewable energy community also for the ADSP, for all the port system authorities in Italy, just considering the possibility to share the energy produced by plants more than 1 megawatt. Okay, next, please. So these are the proposed interventions that we define for the just to obtain the targets and the objectives that I've said before. So the main one are the spreading of LNG as fuel of ships and vehicles. In fact, ADSP, just for this point, for this action, committed a feasibility study and intends to realize an LNG terminal by means of the installation of 10 tanks, allowing with 9,000 cubic meter storage to refill ships and tank trucks. Then the hydrogen ship and vehicles that has a timing that is more moved in the future, is a medium-long timing. The electrification of the docks of the ports, this action is really called cold ironing, and also for this ADSP committed another feasibility study just to evaluate the possibilities of also the criticalities of this technology. Then the installation of charging stations for electric vehicles and purchase of electric vehicles. The energy efficiency interventions of the building envelope and of the public lighting network, the installation of photovoltaic systems on roofs of the hangars and of the concessionaries of the ports, and the application of tidal systems. That is also a medium timing. Next, please. So this is the cost benefit analysis that was included and was mandatory for the drafting of the DASP. In particularly, this analysis consider the comparison between the avoided tons of CO2, PM 2.5 and NEOx compared to investment costs. And so this is the value that here you can see, considering all the actions that are included in the DASP, just to provide in 2050 the decarbonization of the port system. The next, please. So the lesson learned. The lesson learned here, you can see that. So first of all, the coherence with the other ADSP plan. In fact, the management of the port systems not only consider the DASP as an instrument, an important and necessary instrument to manage all the port areas, but there are also other specific plans that have to be coherent among them. Then the high difference in port consumption, as you can see, we consider the Strait Port Authority governs for really different realities in terms of energy consumption than in terms of production of CO2 emissions. So the strategy has to be adapted to the necessity of the to the specific context of the port. And then there is a different cost benefit estimation for several interventions, just because there are different, they impact in different way respect the environmental context of the port. Next, please. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Daniele, thank you very much for to have introduced the DISP, the State di Messina. Also, this project is scored with an high replicability and exploitation level, as you can see from this slide. From a geographical point of view, we don't see any problem because it can be easily applicated to different ports. While from a technological point of view, we have seen that most of the technologies, both traditional one or innovative one, included in the energy plan, can be characterized basically by high replicability in different contexts. From legal point of view, we have seen this specific project that is mandatory for Italian ports, as we have seen. But anyway, we don't see particular legal barriers in deploying this kind of DISP also for other ports, basically, not only in Italy, but also in other islands, countries, and so on. About social acceptance, the project can raise high social acceptance because it takes benefits for all the community, while for investment activity, we see that in general, port authorities can mobilize significant investment to both public and private fund streams, and this is crucial for the development of this environmental and energy plan. Please, next slide. We can say that despite this project is located in Italy, and as we have seen, it is based on Italian guideline developed by Italian Ministry of Ecological Transition, we think that this is something that could be easily applicable to all kinds of ports. Of course, we have to customize the technological feature for the specific context. And that's all from my side. I leave the floor to Giorgio again for the last part of this webinar.
Perfect. Thank you, Domenico, and thank you, Daniele. Now we have the last part of the webinar. We are we have a bit of delay. We will try to keep this panel discussion within 15 minutes. We have these 3 questions and these 6 panelists. So I start from the first question that I asked to Daniele and to Makis. An additional point, as you can see here, in addition to the people that has presented so far, we have 2 additional speakers, who are Luigi Laterza from Sinloc and Makis Kartalidis from CERT. Welcome. So my first question is to Daniele and Makis. What are, in your opinion, the most useful tools for the identification of energy transition actions to be inserted in energy planning documents? I kindly ask you to stay within, let's say, 1 to 2 minutes in your answer. Who wants to start? Makis?
Hello, Giorgio.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think even though it's not a tool, it's the user participation, the local, the stakeholder engagement, and all the discussions with the locals, the participatory process. I think it's the most important thing for energy transition in order to identify all the actions that are needed. And at least the participatory process in SETAs is at least is the most strong tool that can shape the future and give the willingness of the people on what they want to invest as a community or as single persons and citizens, I think.
Thank you, Makis. Please, Daniele.
Yeah, just for my side, I can consider I had two experiences with the small islands. The one with the strait port authority system, and the one with the drafting of the SETA for the island of Salina. And in these two cases, I consider that the knowledge of the context is really important, just because, especially in Italy, there is a very high attention on the respect of the context, the paisistic context and architectural goods. Just before identifying the energy transition actions, the knowledge of the context is fundamental. Then the possible tools. Well, I consider that as Makis said, the involvement of the stakeholders is really important, just because even if some actions could be possible, what citizens think about these actions is also fundamental, just to share before to introduce an action, to share the choice with the local population. I consider it is really important in the way just to have the door open for the application of the energy planning documents.
Thank you, Daniele, and thank you, Makis. I would add just an additional point that is related to some IT tools that are being developed or have been developed in the context of different EU co-funded projects, also on islands, like in the Insule and Llanos projects, and not specific on islands. We have, for example, the Muse Grids project that is coordinated by us at RINA, and if any of the attendees is in Brussels, we have on Thursday the final event in Brussels. And among other things, we have developed good, interesting tools to match the demand of energy and the potential sustainable supply in terms of renewable sources, in order to minimize the overall energy demand, the greenhouse gas emission, energy supply costs, and they are, I think, useful tools to carry out energy planning also on islands. Let's move to the second question. Which are the key stakeholders to be engaged in islands energy transition planning? Here, I asked the question to Petros and to Vedran, as you prefer. Petros.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. So, Vedran, would you like to go first?
You can go. Okay.
Okay. Thanks. So I will focus in the part of mobility, which is the one also that my presentation was related to. So regarding mobility, we can see that from the transition to e-mobility and clean transports, there are many stakeholders that are heavily affected, and especially for islands where we have small closed economies. When a significant part of the local economy is negatively affected or influenced, it can be a reason to stall the transition, to create delays, to create political discontent and so on, which especially for small communities, it's not easy to manage and usually leads to stalling the projects. And especially regarding mobility and islands where we have a lot of tourism-related activities that are connected with mobility, it's very important to address the local rental car businesses, the local massive transportation businesses, whether that is some kind of bus or taxis, taxi drivers, and so on, and of course also the gas stations, because also the refueling the vehicles is a significant part of the new transition period. So with all these professions, it is very important to be in close cooperation and discussions, give them incentives to have the transition also in their activities, and for example, to turn to EV charging, to turn to shared EVs for the rental cars and so on. And it's also very useful to apply business models that are participatory, such as the energy communities, where all these players can invest together to a new legal entity that is responsible handling the mobility on the island, probably as a service. That would be the best, the optimal scenario. And so that the municipality, together with all these stakeholders, create a new entity and they manage the next steps all together, and they also plan in advance all together. And of course, it's also important to work together with other tourism-related activities like restaurants and hotels, who can also offer, for example, charging infrastructure, bike infrastructure, provide incentives to their customers to use alternative mobility tools and so on. So this is from my side, the important stakeholders. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Petros.
Yes, from my side, well, yes, I agree with Petros. If we extend this mobility, which is transport sector, is one of the sectors in energy transition. Also, so actually we have to consider that these people have multiple roles on islands. Either they are professional roles or private roles. In this sense, we have to recognize somehow the community on the island and to connect with all those in first phase the decision makers who can push these projects forward, who can help us to start some pilots to translate our ideas into concrete projects. Then all those in various organizations, either public utilities, either local action groups, or some other entities, maybe there are some supporting public companies in terms related, especially, for instance, on the island of Kirk, there is a public company focused on making the island smart. So they install different various technologies for smart grid, for renewables, and so on. So also many entities from civil sector might be quite important, because they are somehow bridge between those public companies and private sector. Also, from my side, it's important, as I already said, to engage citizens, because they would be the ones who would get the most benefit from the transition, and they should definitely support all the actions. Otherwise, it would be imposed on them, and it won't we won't get the wanted effect. With this being said, they have to somehow embrace this transition, try to find some business model that would be useful for them. As Petros said, either by participating in some mobility as a service scheme, or investing in community power plant or wind power plant or something. So in this sense, they have to be able to connect their activities with these new processes on the island. this would be the best approach, as far as I see it, for being successful in energy transitions. Otherwise, we would also end by having wishful thinking in terms of energy planning, to have all these developed documents, but without true effect.
Thanks a lot, Vedran. Indeed, it's really needed to transpose what we write in this document in real actions to achieve the target. And now I move to the third question. So how to facilitate the access to finance at the planning stage? And I ask this question only to Luigi from Sinlock as financial expert.
Thank you, Giorgio. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry for my voice, which is not, let's say, the best today. But I think the answer from Vedran is also, let's say, relevant for or trying to answer this third question, as of course planning the next activities is indeed key to also have higher possibility to access funding at the planning stage, but even shortly after. Because what we've seen is that, of course, talking from an investor's point of view, the funding is awarded to the project and not to the plan. The plan should set, let's say, specific key targets to reach, of course, in the long term, but also in the short term. And it's important that those targets are later on transposed into actions. And with this respect, it's key to understand what's the investment where the promoter should focus on first. It can be e-mobility, could be related to heating, could be, of course, anything, depending on the context, depending on the activities of the islands, depend of course on a variety of local factors. But after that, of course, only after the project will be, of course, in place and will be there, it could be ready for accessing funding. But one, let's say, aspect that we've learned in NESOI project, but in general in the context, given that the funding is mainly from the European sources, but also from the national programs, the funding is there to finance energy projects, and islands are, of course, let's say, one of the key territories to highlight and to finance the transition. But we've seen that in many cases, the project promoters may not be ready when the funds will be made available. So when the project calls will be open. And for this reason, we say that it's important shortly after that the plan has been set, to keep working on the project to have it ready even before the funds are made available, so that when this will happen, then the project will already be there, and the submission would be easier, and also the probability of getting the funds will be higher, because there will have been more time to, of course, having studied in detail the projects, its impacts, and of course all its aspects. We've seen, on the other hand, let's say, even for example, to mention, even in Italy with the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, that and this is not closely related to energy, but in general with all the various sectors that the plan has impacted, that in most of the cases there has been a very short time span, maybe a couple of months or even less, to, let's say, submit the projects, and that many beneficiaries were not ready with the project to be submitted yet. So it's important, let's say, I think for this, and I think for this it's very important that the plan also specifies the aspects related to the immediate work that should be undertaken after the plan is ready. So in a way that the work to clarify the investment can start, and when after the funding options will be ready, then the projects could be, let's say, financed more easily.
Thank you, Luigi. I think these are useful suggestions and recommendations for islands that want to undertake this energy planning path. We have reached let's say, the end of the webinar. It's noon. So I start thanking all of the attendees, first of all, and all of you that have give presentation or participating during this roundtable and presenting at the webinar. Thank you very much for your attention. This webinar will be available on the NESOI website, so also for people that are interested and could not join today. And in the next weeks, on the website, on our LinkedIn account of the NESOI project, you will be informed also about the upcoming webinars that will be interesting topics for Ireland's energy transition. So thanks a lot, everybody, and have a nice day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.